I committed my first felony the moment that I crossed through those open barricades. And that's the video that got me arrested.
At what point did you know that you were in trouble for being at the U.S. Capitol?
Probably when I found myself on the FBI's most wanted list.
I had no heads up anything was going to happen to me. I woke up to a team of FBI agents in tactical gear storming my apartment.
Why did you end up in solitary confinement for 4 months?
Essentially because I refused to shut up. They never stopped screaming in there. It was animalistic. It was savage. It was demented.
I mean, I don't know how you wouldn't lose your mind.
Why so severe?
To persecute me, to abuse me. They did this to many J6ers. And I said, there is no chance I'm going to bend the knee to this advent of tyranny.
Brandon and John, welcome back to PragerU. As many of you know, we describe PragerU as the clay pots, the truth of what has happened in American history. And both of you experienced January 6th in different ways. And what I would like to do is to get to the bottom line truth so that those of us who have been watching you throughout these last few years can get some serious answers about what happened on this historical day in America. So why don't we start with what brought you to Washington, D.C. on January 6th to begin with? Why did you even go there, Brandon?
I was a scheduled speaker at a permitted event that was happening on Capitol grounds. So a lot of people don't know that the plan all along was that President Trump was going to speak at the Ellipse, and there was going to be a march from the Ellipse to the Capitol, and that there was a second stage set up on a lot on Capitol grounds. Dozens of people were scheduled to speak. I was one of them. So I was on my way to my speaking engagement when I started getting text messages from people all over the country, friends and family who were watching on television saying, we're hearing that there's some sort of disruption at the Capitol and people are going inside the building. And that's when my experience began.
And John, what brought you to D.C. on January 6th?
So I'm the creative director at a nonprofit called America's Frontline Doctors, and the founder was scheduled at the very same event that Brandon was. So I was in town working.
Who organized this event and what happened to the event? Did the event just not happen? Or why did you go from an event to the Capitol?
The event at the Capitol didn't happen because while President Trump was speaking, what happened on January 6th began while President Trump was still speaking, which is why it's so ridiculous that people blame President Trump because, you know, the whatever you want to call it, the riot at the Capitol began while President Trump was still speaking. We didn't know that.
Speaking where?
At the Ellipse. So President Trump was speaking at the Ellipse. And then there was, which is a mile or so from the Capitol. And so there was supposed to be him speaking, the march to the Capitol, and this second event with all of these different speakers. And none of us knew this, of course, because we were sitting outside watching the president speak. So we just headed to the Capitol to fulfill our speaking engagement. On the way, at least in my experience, on the way, I started hearing that something was going on. There was some sort of disruption at the Capitol. I don't believe anything that the news says. So my thought was I have a large social media following. I've got a camera in my pocket. If in fact something's happening, I'm going to film it for myself to put it out so that people can see whatever it is that I'm hearing, what is actually going on. And so as I was approaching the Capitol from the east side, that's when I started shooting a video, which I shot for 8.5 minutes or so. And that's the video that got me arrested.
Okay, so we'll talk more about that. But John, I want to understand. So you were supposed to be speaking at basically a frontline doctors type of event where the president was going to speak as well?
The president spoke at the Ellipse in the morning.
Okay.
At an event that was scheduled far in advance with a lot of people participating in it. Then the expectation, and this was the expectation weeks before the event happened, was that people would march from the morning event to the Capitol building for afternoon events that were closer to the Capitol building grounds. So the event that Brandon was scheduled and that Frontline Doctors were scheduled to participate in was that same event. It's called Section 8 was the area that had a permit and so forth. But before we even got to the point that you could call a riot or any other sort of conflict, there was the Capitol essentially insurgency, where there's documentation of tactical units in black and masks, and you can't see who they are, who first entered into the Capitol, breaking a window to get inside, and then opening a door so that people could walk through. And it devolved from there over a period of time. But that was while President Trump was still speaking. So by the time we got that direction over the course of several hours later, there were many, many people that had been slowly making their way over towards the Capitol building, both on the west side and the east side.
So both of you were heading towards the Capitol around the time that others have already made it into the Capitol.
That's
Is
right.
that correct?
That's
From the east side. And Brandon, you actually have a video of that experience. So
Right.
maybe we can just take us through this moment as
Sure.
we watch the video that you recorded. Here it is. So you're walking in. This is with your camera.
This is me filming. This is the east side of the Capitol. Now, it's important for people to understand the violence and the destruction and people entering the Capitol had happened on the west side of the building, the opposite side of where I was. And it had happened earlier before I got there. So I'm walking up the east side steps, and this is around 2:40 p.m. So if you can see right there, those open barricades right there.
Yeah.
So the barricades were open. There were no signs, no police officers.
Is this illegal? Are you not supposed to cross into here? There are no police officers.
Correct. So I committed my first felony the moment that I crossed through those open barricades.
Allegedly.
Alleged felony, I guess.
Well, I was charged. I mean, I was charged with a felony, and the felony was called
For walking through that gate.
the felony was called knowingly occupying restricted grounds. So they claim that I knew by walking through that open barricade that I was committing a felony offense of occupying restricted grounds. No one ever explained to me how I knew it. The government just told me that I did.
And so all of these people that are on these steps of the east side are
All felons.
all felons.
Right, correct. Well,
But there are no police officers around.
that's correct.
at all.
That's correct.
So, okay, so you keep walking and why were you walking in to I guess, chronicle as a journalist?
Yeah. Again, I was, on my way to my speaking engagement, and I started getting these messages saying, people were saying, people are going in the building, something's going on. And I thought to myself, if something's going on, I want to see with my own eyes. I don't really trust the media. Remember, this was after about 5, 6, 7, 8 months of the media telling us that mostly peaceful protests of Black Lives Matter as we watch buildings burning to the ground. I don't believe the media. So I thought to myself, I have an opportunity to document firsthand with my own camera, and this is what I saw. So, I mean, people were making it sound like, the news was saying something really egregious was happening. I'm looking around and going fake news because everyone looks very calm and peaceful as far as I can see. And look, people riding bicycles. In a moment, you'll see a woman pushing a baby stroller. Hardly, attempt to overthrow the government.
I'm actually looking for police officers, but I don't
not
see
gonna
any
find
police officers. Okay, so you keep walking up the steps.
Right.
And let's look at the next video as you make it up the steps, getting closer. What was your goal, to go into the building?
Yeah, and I'd like to point something out before we push play on this. So right shortly before this moment, I climbed the steps, and at the top of the steps in my video, you'll see there's a man there. He's cupping his hands over his mouth like this, and he's shouting down, "They've opened the doors. They're letting us in. We're going inside. We're going inside." I repeated word for word what he said, which I did throughout the video as other people were talking because I'm documenting what's happening. And I literally repeated the words, "They've opened the doors, we're going in," which is what he had just said. Later, when the government charged me for January 6th, they removed that context and said that I stood outside of the building shouting, we're going in," as if it were my idea. When in fact, I went to the top of the stairs. In fact, the doors were open, and now you'll see.
Do you know who opened those doors at the Capitol?
Would you like to take that?
Oh, yeah. So as we
you also entered through this side.
The east side. They're called the Columbus doors. Now, like I mentioned, the initial insurgency happened on the west side. Someone broke a window, hopped in, then opened the door from the inside, etc. But on this side, the doors were closed for a period of time. This is at the point at which I and my colleague had been a part of the crowd that kind of made its way up the steps. It seemed like they were just kind of standing around protesting, as you can see in that video, just meandering around basically. But we got kind of squashed in that crowd there at the steps. And then we were attacked by the police. Another thing that happened. But a few minutes after that skirmish was sort of getting more wild, suddenly the doors opened from the inside. How did that happen? Well, we had no idea at the time, of course. Now with footage, we can see that people that had made their way in, presumably from the west side and come through the building, had walked up to the inside of the East Columbus doors, and a gentleman named George Tenney pushed it open.
So by the time you arrived, those doors were open, and what was the police instructing you to leave?
No, there were no police instructing us of anything. I was there earlier than Brandon was. So by the time Brandon got there, the doors had already opened. They were not opened when I arrived, although the bronze doors were. So there's two sets of doors on the Columbus entrance, very ornate 20,000-pound bronze doors, which had swung open. And then there's inner doors that are modern. And those were closed with people pressed up against it, essentially wondering, is there something happening in there? Are they going to open the doors and let us in? That was sort of the sense you got from the crowd, was there was nothing else to do because there were supposed to be speeches and a stage, and none of that was there when I walked up. So I was a bit confused. There were Congress people scheduled for that speech, multiple Congress people. So I was wondering, where are the Congress people and their security details and the stage that they're supposed to speak on that I'm supposed to be participating in? It was not there, but there were a bunch of people hanging out on the steps, as you can see in Brandon's video.
So, Brandon, did you end up walking in? Let's just watch this video real quick so we just get a better sense of what the environment was like, I guess, on the west side for both of you.
East side.
On the east side,
right,
for both of you.
Yep. Now, it's important to remember my camera was fully zoomed in at this point too. So at this point, I'm actually about 35 feet away. And in a moment, I zoom out again so you can get a proper context of how far away I actually am. It appeared, if you were to watch this, you might think I was 10 feet away, but I wasn't. I was like 35. I believe that's a police officer right there. It's the only police officer. Yeah, you'll see. And he does not appear to be particularly resistant to people going inside. In the plea deal that I signed with the government said that I witnessed police officers doing their best to restrain the crowd from going inside the Capitol, but that I charged forward anyway.
And did you?
I never entered the Capitol on January 6th. This is as close as I got to
Why
entering.
did you not enter?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. In a moment later in my video, a man comes out of the building, gets on a bullhorn and says, they've cleared Congress. Everyone left the building, move out, move out. And I immediately turned around and moved out. I have to assume, if I look back, that because I was there to document, I felt that there was probably nothing more to document. But the truth is, I still could have gone in if I wanted to. And I made a decision not to.
Well, it wasn't that easy to get in. As you can see, there are a ton of people just in this small limited shot. But the greater context of the day, there were 1 million people wandering around in that city. So there were tens of thousands just in this little area. The congestion was crazy. I mean, it was not easy to get in the building necessarily. Or it wasn't easy to get in the building. And it also wasn't easy to get away from the building. I got caught basically on those steps. There was an incident where the cops started aggressively assaulting the crowd. Then the doors opened, and that's why I ended up getting pushed inside, because people wanted to go inside, but people also were trying to get away from what was behind them. So I had no way to get down or out of the steps or away from the building at that point. The only safe place to go was forward through the threshold, which is what happened. But in my trial, they were asking me, telling the jury, you can't believe this guy. He could have just turned around and left. And they even tried to show video clips of, look, there's a spot in the crowd right here. Why didn't you use that to escape? And it wasn't even the spot where I was located. That's how dishonest and disconnected and ridiculous the whole thing was.
Once you got through the doors and you were inside, what was it like?
It was basically like that video that you're seeing. It was just people meandering around like, oh, wow, there's people inside and I wonder where we go. And it was, as soon as I walked in, I thought, are there people in here? And I see, yes, there are people in here. I saw uniformed police officers inside the building. I saw protesters. I saw people that looked like just employees in uniforms. And I just saw sort of people moving in various directions, but no specific concerted effort to do or push or move anywhere. And mostly just, there was crazy behind me because of the contested situation I described before. In front of me, the doors suddenly opened and it was a lot calmer that way. So we just walked straight ahead and into the rotunda.
Were there any sort of marching orders from either side, the president or the police officers telling you what to do, where to go, to storm the Capitol or to leave the Capitol? Did you feel like there was any sort of marching orders?
Well, from the president's perspective, when people say, oh, Trump told people to go attack the Capitol or whatnot, like Brandon said earlier, this was established weeks in advance. That'd be a morning event. Then there'd be a ceremonial march to the Capitol for afternoon events. So we did that. We did the morning speech. It was fine. We did the ceremonial march. It was fine. Then we got to the afternoon event and there was no stage. And then the cops finally came and started attacking the crowd and things went crazy and it was weird. But there was no marching order from the president other than, we're going to have a speech in the morning, a ceremonial march, and then afternoon speeches. That was the order, which everyone knew and understood, and no one had an issue with that. But there was no order or directive from police officers during the course of the day. There were very few police officers to be found. A million people, and I don't know how many cops were around, but not nearly enough. You couldn't see them. This is where we get to that point where we wonder, why did they decline the 10,000 National Guard troops that President Trump authorized? Because he knew there would be a lot of bodies. So, there was not anywhere near the requisite crowd control that such an event would necessitate.
So you're walking in through these doors, and there are just massive amounts of crowds pushing from every direction.
Yes.
Are you hearing at all, you need to leave, you need to leave? Is there any sort of police announcement saying, get out of here, you're not supposed to be here?
And I was looking and listening for it the entire time. Yeah, did not see or hear that. When I spilled through the doors, initially entering the Capitol, I looked around, saw cops with rifles, like rifles in hand, just calm, and people milling around. And I didn't hear any directive. I didn't see any indication of what to do. Or I knew I couldn't leave because, like I said, I was crushed from behind and the doors opened. There was nothing to do except fall inside. I got basically shoved. So once I'm inside, what do? There was no directive. I simply walked straight ahead and then continued through red velvet ropes, literally, which I, by and large, stayed within the duration of the time I was in the building. And all I did at that point with my colleague was wonder, how do we get out of here? So we wandered around for a while trying to find a safe, appropriate public pathway to find an exit. We kind of dead-ended in a vestibule, which I had no idea what it was or where it was because this place is enormous and there's no signage. But I now know with hindsight that I had inadvertently found my way to the House chamber. So then this was this very dramatic moment in retrospect that the DOJ documented and tried to make this case that myself and others were charging into the House chamber to whatever they're accusing people of doing. I did not know that. I just knew I was stuck in a vestibule. Eventually, a police officer made his way into that contested area, or I said congested area. He had a face mask on. There's people, there's smoke, there's a din. I can't hear anything. He didn't approach me directly. He approached some other people that were further up the vestibule at the House chamber door. But eventually I could see he's telling them to turn around, like, you can't go in this door. So then as soon as we had the space to do that, we turned and went the way we had come.
So there is a video that keeps playing through my mind as you're describing the experience of being inside the Capitol, which I think many of us have found very surprising. It looks like people are kind of walking through the Capitol almost leisurely with not that many police officers, and doesn't look like an actual storming. It just looks like people are a little confused and almost led through the hallways. I want to look at that too and just have you react to that because it seems a little different from what we've consumed in the media. And the language of storming the Capitol and insurrection has led most of us to think that there is just complete and utter constant violence on behalf of anybody who walked in. So take a look at this and let me know, what am I watching?
Well, that's Jacob Chansley, who became known as the QAnon shaman. And he had actually, there's footage of him standing outside of the building, kind of reiterating to people what President Trump had said, go home, be peaceful, don't no violence, things like that. I don't actually know how he ended up inside the building. At some point he did. And when he got inside, he was kind of guided around by these police officers. They led him to the Senate floor. I believe he went inside, said a prayer, and then left. And because of the way that he was dressed, all of that context was left out when the media reported on his involvement in January 6th. And he kind of became like the face of the insurrection because, people thought that he looked, kooky or whatever enough that they were like, great, we can paint this guy as this like psychotic weirdo who was dressed like this and that he led the insurrection or was a part of it.
Well, I'm counting 8 police officers around him. Why aren't they just walking him out if they don't want him in there?
This is what I think is so frustrating about January 6th. And it really illustrates, I think, one of the key differences between the left and the right. Let's pretend for a moment like something similar to January 6th or January 6th itself happened on the left. Let's say it was a bunch of leftist people who went inside of the Capitol. If there were, in fact, people on the left who committed violence, broke windows, went inside, fought with police officers, we would all universally condemn that. But if facts emerged later that said there was a good number of people on the left who didn't do those things and found themselves pretty innocently inside of the building, not really realizing they were doing something terribly wrong, I think that we on the right would separate those people out and be like, okay, it's not fair to lump those people in with what the other people did who actually caused a very serious problem. We were not granted that luxury of being looked at as people who were not involved with violence or destruction or anything like that. What they wanted to do, and when I say they, I mean everybody. I mean the Democrats in office. I mean the left-wing media, the mainstream media, and many Republicans as well.
Terrible.
But the overwhelming narrative that was coming down was that if you were anywhere near the Capitol on January 6th, you were a part of this violent mob that had this intention to go in and do destruction and, at one point overthrow the government and try to harm police officers and all of this stuff. That bears no resemblance whatsoever to my experience on January 6th. I got accused of a lot of things that I didn't do, and I even confessed to things that I didn't do. But for the vast majority of people, even people who entered the building, they went with the most innocent of intentions. Many of them, I would argue, probably didn't even know they were committing any kind of a crime, even if that crime is misdemeanor trespassing. And maybe some people did know that they were committing a crime, but up until January 6th, entering a building that you weren't allowed to go in was a $50 citation.
Right.
We've seen numerous instances of left-wing protesters going in and disrupting congressional hearings. They get a $50 citation and they're dragged out of the building. They're not called insurrectionists and they're not stormed by the FBI and have their lives destroyed.
Right. That $50 citation is handled not in a district court, so there's no criminal record or anything of that nature. And that's the standard. That's the well-established precedent for handling protest issues. So they completely departed from precedent in many, many ways. But that starting point is actually a really important one.
Well, I'm glad you bring up the fact that there were some things that happened that were clearly not okay and clearly, criminal to some degree.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are videos that I have watched where I was in shock to see Americans behave that way. It doesn't matter if they're from the right or the left. You don't get to climb in through a window at the Capitol and think that's totally fine to do. And I would like you to react to some of these videos that I was watching when I was home a week after January 6th, condemning and saying that I'm really disappointed to see this kind of behavior, and let you react to that and possibly tell me whether these are things that you witnessed while you're there or not. Okay, so what are we? Look, this looks like the barricade was open, people charging. It's a compilation by one of the media companies. Hammers, people climbing on the walls. So first of all, did you see any of that when you were there on January 6th?
No, almost everything you're showing now is footage from the west side of the building. And this was not the experience of people on the east side of the building, nor the north or the south. The other thing I want to point out too, this is very important. People like to say, well, if you weren't there with bad intentions, why were people wearing helmets? Why were people wearing goggles? Why did people have pepper spray? Why did people have these things? The reason why is because January 6th was actually the third major march that had happened in D.C. since the election. There was a major march in November, there was a major march in December, and then this one happened in January. Everyone was almost the same, hundreds of thousands of people. And at the march that happened in November and December, Antifa came out in droves and were beating the hell out of old people, mothers with young children. I mean, literally attacking people in the streets as they were walking around D.C. So by the third time that we had this event, people had gotten wise and they were like, I'm going to wear defensive gear. People wore helmets, they wore goggles. They didn't bring those things because they're like, we're going to overthrow the government. They brought those things because they thought we're not safe to do a march in D.C. because all the police had been ordered to stand down by Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C. And people were being assaulted and attacked. And so even though I don't know any of these people, I'm willing to actually go out on a limb and say, I'm not going to condemn anyone who may have had a hammer or something like that, because I don't believe that they brought a hammer to go hit members of Congress over the head with. I think they brought a hammer to defend themselves if they got attacked by Antifa on the way to the Capitol.
And that was definitely why a number of militia groups were present as well. This is well established, documented. You can ask them. These militia groups that have been so defamed and amplified into these villains like the American shaman, like these leaders of the insurrection or whatnot. But these militias were largely there with the intent to provide protection and security of bystanders.
What do you mean by militias?
Well, for example, the Oath Keepers is a well-known group that was one of the most famous entities in the J6 prosecutions. When I was doing the ceremonial march from the Ellipse in the morning to the Capitol grounds for the afternoon speech, we were chaperoned by several Oath Keepers, gentlemen in uniform. It said Oath Keepers, but it probably said security, to help us get through the crowd safely, just crowd management. So, and there were other militia groups. There's many different militia groups throughout the United States, and they generally have a core value system of upholding constitutional values and patriotism. So they were supporting the patriotism aspect of what was going on January 6th, but they had an interest in knowing that because of the previous two events Brandon mentioned, that there was legitimate danger for protesters that were at risk from counter-protesting, which on the left has often been very violent.
But I want to address your question, though, too, because I'm certainly not like a violence or destruction apologist. I absolutely believe that there were people there on January 6th who made really bad decisions.
Yeah, certainly.
And I think it's a combination of, I think that some people made bad decisions in a moment that they normally wouldn't have made, but they found themselves in sort of a crowd, maybe even say mob atmosphere, where something started happening with the crowd and they got swept into that energy of the crowd. That is a very real thing. But the other side of that coin, too, is that we just watched a bunch of moments without a lot of context. And it's very easy to sort of cherry pick these moments where people are behaving badly. Maybe they're pushing a barricade into a police officer. But we now know, after looking at a lot of footage, there were a lot of people that were standing peacefully on the other side of the barricades and found themselves being flashbanged for no reason by police officers, just standing there. They were shooting rubber bullets. One man had a rubber bullet shot into his face. People were standing there really kind of minding their own business. And they became very agitated by being flashbanged and shot and things like that. And it was after those things started happening, the mob surged forward and moved the barricades. Am I excusing it or apologizing for it? I'm not whatsoever. But I'm saying it's important to understand the context of why a lot of things happened, because so many people made choices that day that were not good choices that they wouldn't have normally made. But a lot of them made those choices after violence was instigated against them.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an important point. A lot of those choices, even if they were wise or not, may have been just instinctive and self-defensive choices. A lot of that was happening. There were certainly some just bad choices that shouldn't have been made on the part of protesters and police officers. But there was a lot of instinct, self-defense, and conflict that was generated by government actions, both before and during. If people have not seen it, The Real Story of Jan 6 is a piece done by Joshua Phillip in Epoch Times, where they interview a government expert that his whole job is assessing the use of force by police forces. And it is not just a flippant comment or example here or there. Brandon did a great job listing out some examples, but there is a staggering amount of evidence to show that the government operated wildly improperly, violating established use of force protocols such that it's clear what was going to happen. I'm not going to assess motives that they wanted that to happen. I think you can follow those clues yourself. But there's no doubt with the actions that were taken, the inevitable result was going to be conflict. They created a riot. That's definitely what happened.
Well, at the very least, they certainly didn't make good choices to prevent a riot. I'll put it that way. Because one thing I do know about Trump supporters, even if it's a Trump supporter who by nature is maybe a little bit rowdy or raucous and, maybe not the same kind of constitution you and I may have, if at any point anyone had gotten on a loudspeaker or a number of bullhorns and said, you will be arrested if you walk into the building, or if you walk past that barricade, you are going to be arrested, at least 90%, maybe 95% of the people would have turned around and left. They would have said, this is not worth it. I don't want this. That was never said.
Well, this is why I kept asking both of you that same question. At any point in time, did you hear law enforcement say to you, go home now?
I never even saw law enforcement. I literally never saw law enforcement on the side of the building I was on.
Yeah. I had 3 exchanges with police officers. They didn't tell me anything the first couple of times other than general, like, this way, and we went that way. This is after I'm inside the building. Before I got in the building, I could not find any direction from a police officer. So to answer your question, no, heard none of that. But at the very end, a police officer walked up to me in the rotunda. This is after we've been in there for 40 minutes or so, and we're just like Dr. Gold had already given her speech. We're just standing there like, when can we get out of here and how can we get out of here? And a police officer walked up to me and he said, hey, I think it's calmed down enough that we're asking people to start making their way back to the east door to exit. So we're just asking you to do that. And I said, that sounds great. Thank you, sir. And walked out.
The Rolling Stone published a piece about you.
Yes, they did.
Now, they've written all kinds of things about you, and we can get into it. But one of the things that they reported was that you sent a private text message that says, we stormed at the Capitol and it was insane.
Yes. Yes. I actually love this question. So it's really important to understand the context, right? At the time that this all happened, I was not expecting to be going inside the building. And then suddenly the doors opened and people were going inside and we were getting attacked by cops. That was definitely insane. So just the unexpected nature of everything to me was encapsulated by the word, this is insane, what's going on? But the storming word, first of all, I didn't make that word up. I had heard people saying this in the hours after the event happened. So that text message was sent hours after the event occurred.
It wasn't while you were there.
No.
Okay.
No, it was hours later. My brother checked in, like, he starts seeing the things on the news and he's thinking, I know my brother John Strand is there and I'm worried maybe you got hurt or like, what's going on? This seems kind of crazy. And I said, yeah, it's insane, but we stormed the Capitol because by that point, we'd already gone inside, then gone out. I kind of assessed what happened. How did we get in the building? And the storming word, I'd heard people use it, but in my mind, it was basically like when you are at a football game for your high school and everyone's there, grandparents, it's just a huge crowd. You've been waiting for this game all year. You're behind in the fourth quarter. You think you have no chance to win. And then somehow they go the length of the field. The last couple seconds, they score a touch and they win. And you had no idea what's going to happen. You storm the field. You're excited. So I just saw these protesters excited to be here, a little bit confused. Like I said, there's supposed to be speeches that didn't happen and whatnot. But the doors opened and people were in the building waving their flags and like, well, here's our last stand. We're protesting a stolen election or whatever their complaint was. And so storming the Capitol was just this recognition that, oh my God, all at once, all of these protesters just showed up all at once inside of the building.
At any point in time, did anybody tell you to storm the Capitol?
No.
It's very interesting the way you describe this because it almost sounds like the media inculcated into you that language of storming the Capitol. What are the chances that you will send a private text message to your brother using the term storm the Capitol, and meanwhile, the media is building an entire campaign with that language? It's almost like they got you.
Yeah. Like I said, I would not have used that term of my own mind. I had heard a bunch of people in the hours after the event saying that. Probably there were already media reports using the terminology, I would guess. But I just heard people in conversation, storming the Capitol, storm the Capitol. And I mean, I saw a whole bunch of people suddenly arrive and then suddenly go in when the doors opened, which I didn't expect the doors to be opened. I didn't why is the crowd going in the building? But also, why isn't the stage here? And where are the Congress people that we were scheduled to speak with? I had a lot of questions.
Can I address that word storm too? Because it's such an important point that you're making of like the words that we used and the information that we had at the time that we used them, which we didn't have any way of knowing later what the narrative would become and how the words we were using were going to be misinterpreted on purpose. But I also used the word storm in a tweet that I had put out that day. I said something about Patriots stormed the Capitol. I think I said Patriots stormed the Capitol from all sides. I will never forget why I said this. So I was on the east side of the building. I walked to the southeast corner and I walked to the northeast corner. And when I walked to the southeast corner, I saw that there were people on the south of the building. And then I went to the northeast corner and I saw that there were people on the north of the building. And I thought to myself, wow, there are people on all sides of this building. Like I remember thinking that. And in my mind, I thought to myself, wow, Patriots stormed the to me, the word stormed was synonymous with surrounded. They surrounded the Capitol because they want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to be recognized. They stormed the building. And I wrote, Patriots stormed the Capitol from all sides. I literally meant there were so many people there that they had surrounded the building. That's what I meant when I said storm the building. But it was used against me in court too. And they said, oh, Straka said, the Patriots stormed the Capitol. And so I didn't have any idea at that point that I had written what had happened on the other side of the building.
Yeah, it's interesting where that word came from to all of you.
Yeah. But I think it was a media plant word and a part of the narrative building that was going on. But at the moment when it happened, again, when you rush the football field, The word to describe that is storming. It simply means everyone's excited and arrives all at the same time. That's what it means. The reason that it gets misused here, and they're using it on purpose, is because storming, when there are no weapons and there is no ill intent, that kind of storming is simply excitement. It's a crowd. Storming, as used by the left-wing narrative about January 6th, is that this was a violent event with weapons to commit an act of war or aggression. But I'm sorry, flagpoles and a random hammer are not weapons of war.
Right.
Like, we need to be real about this. This was a political protest of excited people that suddenly rushed in the door. You could say that's storming in the sense of storming the football field. That's fine. That's what I texted my brother. But
at what point did you know that you were in trouble for being at the U.S. Capitol?
Probably when I found myself on the FBI's most wanted list.
When was that? When did you know that you were in trouble? The day after, the day of, when you were walking out of the Capitol? Did you know you did something wrong?
No. Definitely not when I walked out. I can tell you how I know I didn't think I did anything wrong, because I just stood there on the steps for another 45 minutes chatting about it. So normally when you do something and you know it's wrong, you don't hang around. Right. you leave the scene. So we chatted for almost an hour on the steps. Again, that's probably when I started hearing the storm phrasing and different things. That's when I heard a report that Ashley Babbitt had been shot and killed. I was standing on the steps after I had after walked out. Famous piece of video from my trial, where some cops walk out of the building. You know, they had finished up and were leaving. I'm standing on the steps. This is an hour after I'd gotten out, and I'm clapping and saying, thank you, back the blue, thank you. I'm applauding them. I appreciate them. I knew they had a crazy, tiresome day. I didn't know the full extent of what had happened at that point, but I knew it was chaos. And they used that to try to show the jury. They froze it at one point where I was doing a fist pump, like, because I do that when I'm excited. And they're like, look at this guy. He's angry and insulting the cops and et cetera, et cetera. They completely lied about all of this. But I was standing there just talking about it. So no, I had no idea that I had done, I did not do anything wrong, actually. So
when did you find out, Brandon, that you were in trouble?
So that video that I shot, I immediately uploaded it to Twitter that day, like very shortly after I filmed it. And then I went back to my hotel room a couple of hours later. When I got back to my hotel room, I turned on my television, and that's when for the first time I started to see what had happened on the west side of the building. I had no idea until I saw it on my television in my hotel. I became very confused by what I was seeing, because I didn't know if it was something that was happening live, like this conflict had broken out after I left, or what it was. And my hand to God, I never in a million years dreamed or thought that I had done something wrong. I wasn't worried about that in the least. I was worried that my followers would be concerned about me, because I had uploaded this video and they might be like, oh, is he there in the middle of some sort of scuffle? Is he okay? I was like, I don't know what's going on, so I'm just going to take the video down. I took the video down, but it had already been copied by left-wing Twitter trolls, who then began posting it every day repeatedly on Twitter and tagging the FBI and the DOJ and saying Brandon Straka was there. He was a part of the insurrection. You have to come and get him. People kept asking me for weeks, are you worried? And I said, no. I said, I don't like this kind of attention, but I said I didn't break the law, so I don't have anything to be worried about. I had no heads up anything was going to happen to me until the morning of Monday, January 25th. I woke up at dawn, this is 2.5 weeks after January 6th, to a team of FBI agents in tactical gear storming my apartment at dawn,
Yes.
Getting me out of bed, putting me in handcuffs,
The weaponized.
and telling me that I was facing multiple felony charges for what I had done on January 6th. And they began stripping my apartment of my computers, my iPads, hard drives, phones, thumb drives, camera equipment, clothing, taking my things, sealing them in bags, cuffing my hands behind my back, and taking me to jail.
And then what happened?
Well, I spent 2.5 days in jail, 24-hour lockdown, and then I was released from jail. And when I was released from jail, the first thing I did the next morning, I was released in the middle of the night. The next morning, I went to have a meeting with my attorney that my work team had found for me while I was in jail. And he began to explain to me the situation. I said, what the hell is going on? And he said to me, well, you're currently being charged with 2 felony charges and a misdemeanor. And I said, what are the felonies? And he said to me, well, felony number 1, knowingly occupying restricted grounds. In other words,
That was when you walked through that open gate.
through the open barricades, yes. So in other words, trespassing on Capitol grounds, but I was being given a felony for that. Felony number 2, impeding law enforcement. And my eyes bugged out. And I said, what are you talking about? There are no police officers. There were literally no police officers on the east side of the building. And my attorney said to me, have you watched your video? And I said, no. I was like, I've actually never seen it. I shot it. I uploaded it to Twitter. I deleted it, but I've never watched it. And he said, well, you need to watch it, because he said, there's one moment in your video where one officer is walking through the crowd on his way into the Capitol, and he's carrying a plastic shield above his head as he's walking through. And one of these guys grabs the shield out of his hand, and they start passing it around for about 30 seconds. Then they give it back to him. And while that's happening, you hear several voices in the crowd. Some are shouting, take the shield. I didn't even notice any of this was happening because I was holding my camera above my head like this, and there were just hundreds of people around talking. It's, I'm going like this, but my camera caught it. So the FBI said, well, that's you. You're the one shouting to take the shield, that I was leading the charge to do this. And so they charged me with a felony called impeding law enforcement. And then they charged me with a misdemeanor of disorderly conduct with an intent to disrupt a hearing before Congress. But one more point I want to make really quickly, because John said earlier, normally, I don't remember, but you said something about like normally people don't want people to see the crime they're committing or whatever.
Yeah. You don't hang around at the scene after.
There you go. Yeah. So I want people to really think about this, because by the way, I took a misdemeanor plea deal, and as a part of my misdemeanor plea deal, I had to say I did those things. They wouldn't offer me a plea deal unless I confessed to doing them, which I 100% unequivocally did not do. Didn't do it. But I was like, so, I've had this amazing career in politics that I never thought was going to happen. And this career is fueled by the support of my conservative audience. Without the loyalty and support of my conservative audience, I would have no political career, which I love. If there's one thing I know about my audience, they don't want to see police officers being attacked. They're law and order kind of people. The idea that I would go to the Capitol, film myself telling people to take a shield from an officer, and then intentionally upload that video to Twitter so that my conservative audience could watch me doing it is so stupid. I'm simply not that dumb. But what they wanted was to create the story that the Walkway campaign founder was a violent anarchist who went to the Capitol to encourage people to assault officers and encourage people to storm the building. That's the story they wanted. So that's the story they created.
Brandon, what happened once you took the plea deal, which you say you're not guilty of, but you took the deal? Then what? Were you able to walk away?
Well, no. So I pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge about 10 months after I was arrested. And when you plead guilty to, you take a plea deal with the government, you also have to sign what's called their statement of offense. So the statement of offense is essentially the confession that the government writes on your behalf. Now, it's called a plea deal, but there was no deal to be made. If there was anything in your statement of offense that you objected to, the response that all of us got was, well, then you're welcome to go to trial. And going to trial means you go before a DC judge and a DC jury, because they wouldn't release jurisdiction of any of these cases. This is a district that voted 93% against Donald Trump. I say against Donald Trump because nobody voted for Joe Biden. People only voted against Donald Trump. They hate Donald Trump. They hate his supporters. They hate guys like us. Nobody stood a chance going to trial in DC, which is why they've gotten a 100% conviction rate on trial for January 6 cases. So I signed their completely bogus statement of offense. I got a misdemeanor plea deal. I was sentenced to 3 months of house arrest, 3 years of probation, fines, fees, community service, and court-ordered mental health services because I voted for Donald Trump. So obviously I'm insane. But in addition to that, and we don't have to get into it, when I signed their false statement of offense, I was then sued. Once I confessed to having said the words, take it, to encourage the crowd to take a shield from an officer, a Soros-funded nonprofit law firm called Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law out of Washington, D.C. This is a nonprofit law firm that compulsively sues conservatives and Republicans alleging civil rights violations and racist acts on behalf of conservatives. They sued me under the KKK Act. They went and they found 8 Capitol police officers who are black and brown to be the plaintiffs in their case and alleged that I am a white supremacist who went to the Capitol to encourage the mob to attack black and brown police officers and deprive them of their civil rights. And that's something else I had to go through for 2.5 years.
What did all of that cost you?
All in, I spent over $300,000 defending myself between my criminal case, that civil case, and I was also subpoenaed and deposed by the January 6th committee. So I had to hire lawyers to go through all of the discovery and the depositions of the J6 committee.
Wow. John.
Wow.
I mean, Brandon's story sounds really horrible until you actually hear John's story.
Yeah.
So
You think that's bad?
Yeah.
yes, if you think that's bad. So, John, when did you find out that you were in trouble, and what was that like?
Oh man, that was Martin Luther King Day. It's January 18th of 2021. I was in Beverly Hills working, and the front door was obliterated with a battering ram. I was assaulted with 20 tactical soldiers in a SWAT unit. With red laser dot sights on my chest. And I mean, I could smell the sweat from the adrenaline of these officers who were in fight or flight mode, thinking that they might get killed because apparently they were informed I was a violent, terrorist that they were attacking. Meanwhile, I saw photos at trial and discovery, guys in the bushes with surveillance cameras in the bushes in Beverly Hills, surveilling me at home for a week prior.
Wow.
But they never gave me a phone call to say, hey, can you come down to the office so we can talk about this? No, they just assaulted us and demolished our front door and disappeared me in jail for 4 days without a phone call. 4 days, my mother, my family, my attorney, no one knew if I was alive or where I was. So that's illegal. They finally found, my colleague hired a PI to figure out where I was and force the issue to get me bonded out. So then, of course, I knew I was in trouble.
What were you charged for?
I was charged with 5 counts. The felony was 1512C2, along with the 4 misdemeanors that Brandon described that pretty much everyone
And
received.
what specifically did they say that you did?
They specifically said that I was always at the front leading the charge of this insurrection and framed me as, the Magazulander general.
Because
of
you
radical
were
troops.
a speaker there?
I'm the creative director at America's Frontline Doctors, so I was with a scheduled speaker and I was there doing my job that day. The case that the government made, though, was more related to the general narrative of a violent insurrection to take over the government.
Mm-hmm.
And, my entry into this whole world, I have been a lifelong actor, fashion model, working here in Hollywood for many, many years. It was not political because you can't be if you're a conservative. But in 2020, with the lockdowns, I decided to go public in resistance against what I understood to be tyranny. And that quickly coincided with supporting the 2020 campaign for re-election for Donald Trump.
So they sent you to jail.
Yeah.
So can you just describe to us how that went down? I mean, you got 3 years in prison and 4 months in solitary confinement. Is that right?
Well, they didn't sentence me to that exactly, not to the solitary confinement. But I diverged from most January 6 stories at the point where I refused to take the plea deal. So Brandon's talked about the plea a lot. We don't have enough time to get into all the details because the what they did with these pleas was very, very evil and very, very specific and strategic in what they did and how they did it, in order to accelerate the pace at which everyone just said, I'm guilty, to accelerate the intensity of those forced false confessions that Brandon has detailed very nicely. So they built a whole narrative of many people that are saying, I confessed, I knew in advance I was breaking the law. I knew in advance I had the intent to overtake the government, et cetera, et cetera. This was the story they're building, and they got a bunch of people with a proverbial gun to their head to say, yeah, I did this. So I understood shortly after the event happened, like a few weeks after it happened, I got arrested. I was disappeared for 4 days, settled down, kind of figured out what is going on here. And then I got the plea deal presented to me by the government. And I realized where this was going. I read that fine print. I read that statement of offense. And I said, hell no. There's not a chance in the world that I am going to publicly swear that I did these things, that I'm going to publicly affirm the weaponized Department of Justice and what it is doing to the American people. There is no chance I'm going to bend the knee to this clear advent of tyranny. So I told my attorneys and my family and my colleagues and Brandon, I said, I'm not taking this plea deal. And everyone's basically said, that's insane.
What did it cost you to not take the plea deal?
I mean, I had a golden parachute plea deal in this case. And this is also pretty unusual in January 6th. Some people had a plea deal that involved a single misdemeanor and they took it. Some people had a plea deal that still involved felonies and multiple years of prison. So a few people went to trial, not that many, but those who went to trial typically were facing felonies and years of prison either way. In my case, I was facing 23 years of potential prison and $500,000 in fines with this felony and the other charges, or I could have a single misdemeanor and go
Over
home.
20 years in prison?
I was facing 35
Yeah.
with my charges.
I mean, these numbers just sound so massive.
They're insane. Some people had multiple felonies that would have racked up to 50, 60, 70, 80 years of potential maximum prison time. But I was facing a maximum potential of 23 years. But that was the weight of the charges that were brought against me. Massive, totally insane. And a single misdemeanor at that point would have more or less been a slap on the wrist, and the whole thing would have been done in 2021. Like, I would have had my life back for the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So it cost me everything. That was the answer to your question. It cost me everything I possibly could have had to give. I knew I was going to be convicted at trial. It's completely obvious. The numbers bear it out. But I also just understood, again, what part of the movie we were in here. This was not just some random conflict at a protest. This was a strategized conflict and a strategized series of events and a strategized narrative. Storm the Capitol. All these things that we've been talking about, these terms that you're hearing, this is part of a plan. This is part of a story. And unfortunately, the left is very good at telling stories that advance their causes and put Americans in danger.
So you ended up going to prison.
Yeah.
Can you just describe that?
What
was prison
hard
like?
to describe. It's very dirty. It's very depressing. It's soul crushing. It's extremely physically uncomfortable, but the psychological pain is far worse.
How long were you in prison?
I was sentenced to almost 3 years. I was given a 32-month sentence plus 36 months of supervised release. I did not take the plea, though, so I appealed the convictions immediately and pressed my case while I'm in prison to the Supreme Court. And I won. And because I did not plead guilty and I won at the Supreme Court, I was then released after having served a year, 366 days.
Why did you end up in solitary confinement for 4 months?
Essentially because I refused to shut up.
What?
I had been very vocal for the whole 2-year period before the trial. So January 6th happens, but I don't go to trial for almost 2 years later. I was continued to remain vocal after having been convicted by a DC jury, speaking publicly, doing interviews saying it was fraudulent, J6 was a setup, and in my case particularly, all the video shows I did nothing wrong. I pled not guilty because I am innocent. I knew the jury would convict me in advance anyway because it's DC. I said that publicly in advance. I was proven right. I continued to castigate a fraudulent system and a dishonest and very partisan judicial process, a weaponized government. I continued to expose and highlight this for 8 months after trial before I was sentenced. That's insane. Any attorney will tell you once you're convicted and you have not yet been sentenced, zip. Doesn't matter how innocent you are. Don't urge the judge to hurt you any more than he has to. But I didn't do that because it wasn't about me or the sentence. It was about the truth and how Americans were being sabotaged by their government. So when I finally got to sentencing, the judge was furious. He said it from the bench that I'm sending a message that this can never happen again. People cannot basically do what I had done, which was to speak publicly and criticize the government.
They made an example out of you.
Yeah, that's the textbook definition of fascism. The government said, from the bench, he said, I'm going to send a message. If you criticize the Washington, D.C. court system, you go to prison for years. This is what happens.
What was it like in solitary confinement?
That's a really hard question to answer, at least in a brief moment. It was terrible. It would be very easy to despair and find yourself not believing you could survive. People commit suicide in those circumstances quite frequently. It was horrific. It was kind of like, imagine if you were on a submarine. So you're in a very tight, condensed environment. It's all metal. It's harsh. It's uncomfortable. It's kind of nerve-wracking. And you are in some hallway and somebody kind of knocks or trips you into this door and suddenly the door shuts and you realize it's locked from the outside and you're in this closet on a submarine and you're banging on the door like, what happened? Let me out of here. No response, no answer. And then suddenly you hear this sound, ding, and suddenly you realize the submarine is sinking. It's submerging. And then it hits the bottom.
That's what it felt like emotionally and mentally.
Yeah. You keep banging on the door. No one answers. You're trapped at
Did
the
you have
bottom
a
of the
window?
ocean. You have basically that.
Books?
I did get a few books. That was life-saving. Yeah, I made sure I got a Bible.
What did you read when you were in solitary confinement?
I read the Psalms a lot. Yeah. I say the Psalms felt three-dimensional as I read them.
Did your family know you were in there? Were you able to connect with them?
I had no idea. I knew nothing about anything.
We didn't know. Nobody knew. We tried for months. We just didn't hear from him.
We just didn't know what was going on.
And then we couldn't get answers. No one would answer.
I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing, except I had done an interview with Grant Stinchfield, who has been a stalwart supporter from the beginning, just saying, what happened to you? What's going on? So I had done an interview from in prison, just on the phone. As far as I understood, it was legal. I had registered that contact according to the prison procedure. So I just made a normal phone call, had an interview, thrown into solitary shortly after.
Oh, that was the punishment,
Yeah.
that you spoke to the public while you were in there.
Yeah.
Was that illegal to do, or?
No, the prison will claim that there's a process by which you have to ask their permission or whatever, and that I didn't follow the process. They didn't tell me what the process was. They didn't tell me anything.
So speaking to the media from prison is what sent you into solitary confinement.
It's definitely what got me there. Yeah.
Did you have a sense of time in solitary confinement? Did you know you were there for 4 months? Did you know how long you will stay there?
I mean, I found a piece of paper and a prison pen, which is like this, and scratched off scratch marks day by day.
Could I say something on your behalf?
Yeah.
He and I have talked about his experience in solitary confinement. And I don't know, maybe there's things you just don't even want to think about or talk about. But I mean, John has described screaming all night long, like a screaming from around you that never, ever stops. And being on the brink of losing your sanity because you can't there's not a moment of quiet. There's not a moment where people, and forgive me for saying this, but I mean, he's described like the people around him, like he was in a cage surrounded by animals. I mean, like just the shrieking and screaming of animals that doesn't stop for 4 months. I mean, I don't know how you wouldn't lose your mind.
How did you not lose your mind?
The prison guards.
Or despair?
There's a group of guards called the SIS. It's like the SWAT team in prison, basically. And these guys threw me in an interrogation room and were interrogating me. This is like a scene out of a movie.
Asking you what?
They were not asking. They were accusing me of crimes. They were accusing me of planning additional criminal activity, inciting violence. It was insane. And they said, we're throwing you in the hole. And if you think prison has been bad, just wait until you have a few weeks in the shoe. They're like taunting me. They're bragging about how they're going to abuse me in there. They told me this is the worst shoe in the country. This is Miami FCI. So it's the worst solitary unit in the country. The people in there are like animals. They're all competing about who can be the worst piece of garbage. And they never stopped screaming. And he wasn't lying. They never stopped screaming in there. It was animalistic. It was savage. It was demented. I felt like a corner of hell in your imagination and you couldn't get out.
Why do you think they punished you that way? Were you targeted in particular for this January 6th? Why you, and why so severe?
Two things. Number one, J6ers were targeted in general. Many different examples of this. The way that they transported us was overly harsh. The assignment of the prison was improper and overly harsh. BOP policy is extremely well documented exactly who goes where and why. I was rated for a camp. I actually requested that specific camp in Pensacola because I now reside in Florida, so that was the territory. The judge said, yes, put that on the record, that's fine. But they didn't put me in that prison. They put me in a much more dangerous, violent, terrible prison than that camp.
Why?
Why? To persecute me, to abuse me. They did this to many J6ers, but in my case particularly, in that terrible prison, they made it far worse by putting me in this isolation environment. But it's because I continued legally, peacefully, appropriately to say, I won't back down. I won't silence myself. I will not self-censor. I still have constitutional rights. I'm an innocent American, wrongfully accused, unjustly imprisoned, but I am respecting due process. I self-surrendered myself to that prison. They didn't drag me in there. I walked up in a suit and said, here I am. But I had an appeal, which I continued to litigate with my attorneys while I'm in prison. So I continued to speak and to represent my values and to do my part to stand up for this country. And they didn't like that. That was not part of the J6 program. The point of J6 was to destroy and demonize people like Brandon that are champions for constitutional rights and American values. It is to silence Americans who in their heart know what they believe. They know what's right. And they want to stand up for that, or they at least want to share their opinion about it. And they feel endangered. That's what J6 was about, was fear and silence and endangerment of Americans who truly believe in preserving constitutional governance in America.
Who gave you hope, if at all, that the nightmare will end?
That was definitely God and God alone. Solitary particularly was truly horrific. As an artist, I've struggled at various times in my life with depression and other forms of just wrestling with who I am and with where God is and how to deal with difficult situations. I felt some of those things resurge while I was in solitary.
Of course.
I felt very vulnerable. I felt very endangered by the trauma I was experiencing and what it could trigger and unleash to put myself in a very dangerous situation. So I prayed and I just begged God to do what only God can, and just protect me when no one else can protect me. Keep me hopeful when I am losing hope day by day. There is a cumulative effect to this time. A day in solitary is not the same thing as a week in solitary, and a week in solitary is not the same thing as a month in solitary. It's every day that goes by is infinitely worse than the last day. Another thing, I don't know if I told you, but they violated their own rules so many times, the BOP. The BOP is the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So it's federal management of the prison system for federal crimes. In solitary, per BOP rules, you are required for every inmate to have a phone call at a minimum of every 7 days. It doesn't sound like a lot. And when you're in such miserable conditions, you need anything that you can get in terms of humanity and just having hope to survive. But when you're in solitary confinement, that phone call 7 days later is the difference between life and death. You would scratch somebody's eyes out to get that phone call by the time you're at day 6. You'd scratch your own eyes out to have that phone call. It's the only thing that matters. They would never let me have that phone call. So as the days grew into weeks and I didn't hear from anyone, and I had no idea if I'd be in this hole for 3 years. I had no idea if my parents were still alive. I knew nothing. I had no access to information, just despair and pain and trauma and anger and terror. So I prayed a lot.
Did your attorneys continue to work for you? I know that we never stopped hearing from Matt Gaetz about your case.
Yes.
He was very active in doing what's right by you.
Yes.
How did that unfold while you're in there?
I'm deeply indebted to Congressman Matt Gaetz and very proud of the work that he's done as an American and as a congressman. Very grateful and proud of the courage and the hard work of my attorneys, which included Dr. Gold, who's an attorney, as well as a number of other attorneys that have worked with me throughout the course of this saga. They worked relentlessly during this period. I had testified along with Brandon at a congressional hearing on J6 weaponization that Congressman Gaetz hosted. So he was aware of some details, and my legal team reached out to him, as well as Congressman Clay Higgins, who's also been really strong on this issue. And I was later in a Louisiana prison, which is in his district. But at this time, Congressman Matt Gaetz really went to the mat for me when I was vanished. No one heard from me, like Brandon said, like what happened to him? Congressman Gaetz actually spent his entire 5 minutes at a secondary hearing that happened later, where they forced the director of the BOP, Collett Peters, to come in and answer for what was going on. He spent that entire time asking, what happened to John Strand? Where is he? What's going on in that place? So he scheduled a meeting to go make sure I was okay and actually visit me. And then they whisked me out of the middle of the night right before he got there.
Wow.
To avoid accountability is essentially what they did, of course, which was disgusting and very rude to the congressman. But he forced the issue and got me out of that hole. It saved my sanity. I'm very grateful.
And Brandon, I know that there are many people who have continuously supported you throughout the years.
Yeah. Well, it's important to remember, I think that, part of the reason why January 6th turned into what it turned into is because we lost control of the media narrative and we allowed the left to completely dominate the narrative. And there were a lot of people on the right who, despite the fact that they loved having me on their shows and their networks or whatever prior to January 6th, cut me off entirely after that. But I want to really pay homage, I think, and honor the people who didn't do that. And that's people like Mark Levin, Tucker Carlson, Lara Trump, Laura Ingraham, Mike Huckabee, Eric Metaxas. I mean, I'm sure I'm leaving out a good number of people, but these are people who, without hesitation, said, no, we want to give you a platform to share your story and what you went through mattered. And please don't think if I didn't say your name that I don't include you in that list. But off the top of my head, those are some pretty high profile people who had, I think, a lot to lose by associating with people associated with J6 early on, but didn't turn their backs and offered a platform to get the truth out. And I will love them and respect them forever for doing that.
Yeah. Eric Metaxas was a real hero.
Eric Metaxas is definitely one of the good guys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He stood up for me too.
Yeah.
And he's been preaching the truth on J6 from the beginning without apology. So.
Yeah.
Brandon, how's it been since the pardon?
Well, the best part for me about the pardon has been that it nullified my plea deal. So, one of the really difficult things for me was having to confess to things that I didn't do and not to be able to even publicly say that these things are not true. Thankfully, most conservatives, and 99% plus, are very intelligent and know what the media is, know what the government is, know what the Democrats are. So I had very few people believe the statement that I had signed. But that doesn't take away the fact that I have been taunted relentlessly by the left for the statement that I signed. And by the way, most of the people on the left also know that it's not true. But the same people who are crying, Donald Trump's a fascist and Donald Trump's a dictator, absolutely love that Joe Biden's DOJ forced people to confess to things that they didn't do and rub in their face that the government made you say that you did things that you didn't do. So I've been kind of going through that for like 4 years, not to mention all the trouble it caused me being sued, being permanently banned by PayPal, Venmo, Stripe, email services, donor portals, banks. I mean, all of us were really unpersoned in just about every way that a person can be unpersoned in the digital age, not to mention ostracized by our communities. We have 5 January 6 defendants who committed suicide rather than continue to go through the torment of what people have had to go through. But what the pardon did for me was took off the table the risk or the threat that by coming out publicly and saying unconditionally, I did not do the things that I confessed to doing on January 6th, that I couldn't be further prosecuted or putting myself in danger. My judge, Judge Dabney Friedrich, in Washington, D.C. I would like to see all of these judges unseated. I hope that they all get, what's the word?
Impeached.
Thank you. Why do I always forget that word?
They definitely need to be impeached.
I hope that they all get impeached. But Dabney Friedrich called me into court many, many months after I had already served my sentence and done my plea deal because I began speaking out in the media. I didn't overtly say that my plea deal was a lie, but I was saying things like, please watch my video and ask yourselves, does that sound like my voice saying, take it, take it? Just a fair question. She called me into a courtroom and said, I'm getting disturbing reports that you're doing media interviews that could be construed, making statements that could be construed as contradictory to your plea deal. And if you don't want to be facing more felony charges of 1001 lying to investigators, federal investigators, you better stop making these statements, which, by the way, was extremely chilling and terrifying. And
I'm sure
I did kind of go through a period of time where I was like, should I continue speaking out about this? But I did continue. But now I can unequivocally say these things are not true. I didn't do these things. And that is extremely liberating. I mean, even though I didn't go to prison, go to solitary confinement, whatever, I feel like everything I experienced would have been appropriate if I was being accused of manslaughter or something. Like if I hit somebody with my car and killed them, to be criminally charged, civilly sued, go through all this, like that would make sense.
Right.
Standing outside the building for 8 minutes, shooting a video, like.
Or what you described to me sounds like a punishment for somebody who entered the Capitol with a gun in their hand. Then I would say, wow, you need to be locked up.
Yeah.
But to go there and just speak and then be chaperoned in and out, and
I was literally there doing my job. I wasn't even there to be a protester. I was a director in a a chaperone of a scheduled speaker. So
with a permit.
Yeah.
You had a permit to go there.
I told my lawyers and everyone,
Wow.
if they were going to even make a pretense that this was fair, they would have found the one guy that they would say, oh, he's not actually guilty. That would have been me.
Yeah.
Like, what more? They could have placated their leftist base.
What happened to,
say,
the
like, he
people
he
who
was just an
actually
employee.
jumped through the window? Because there were people on the west side.
I think those are government operatives. I don't think they were charged. They weren't identified. People that broke through the windows on the west side early on.
There is a video that I was watching where you see people from the west side of the Capitol.
They're in black tactical gear.
Going in through the window. What happened to those people?
That's an organized military insurgent unit.
That was from earlier in the day.
Yeah.
That's what you believe. You believe that it was organized.
100%.
Because where are those people? They would have been pardoned right now and we could be talking to them, correct?
Yeah.
So these people who walked in through the window are nowhere to be found.
Now, I know a girl, I think that was on the east side of the building, and she entered the Capitol through a broken window. Sorry, I'm laughing. But
no, I mean,
you kind of have to laugh, right?
After it was broken. I doubt she broke it.
Yeah, right. But I guess the point is, like, it just shows, again, the disparity of how nothing makes any sense. Because this girl actually went into the building. She entered the building by crawling into a broken window, and she was sentenced to 2 months of probation. That was her total sentence, 2 months of probation. He goes to prison for almost 3 years. I get house arrest and, all this other stuff for not even entering the building. And I'm glad, by the way. I don't wish she had it worse. Like, I don't wish that. But she went into the Capitol through a broken window and got
the more famous you are, the worst
100%.
the punishment.
And they said that out loud. It's not even speculation. I mean, they were punishing people who had influence. Basically, they said, if you had influence and you were anywhere near this thing, you should have known better. And we're going to teach you an extra deterrent because there's a responsibility for having influence, and you broke the trust of that responsibility, or however they want to view that.
Yeah, but again, the judge literally said, "I'm sending a message because you have been running around the country telling people that the DC court system is corrupt and unfair," which it is. And Exhibit A was my trial. So he said, "I am going to punish you more harshly for the crime of criticizing the government."
That really sounds like communist.
Yeah.
China.
That's
Russia.
what it is. It's communism, fascism, all of these, totalitarian concentrations of power in a single source that says, do what I say or I'll crush you.
Yeah.
And so as an American citizen, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm supposedly supposed to have due process. During the course of time, I continue to articulate with free speech the First Amendment right that I have, that I am innocent, the government's guilty, they're corrupt, there's evidence. Here, check it out, see what you think. That's all legal. That's all appropriate. But then that was used as evidence that I'm, a worse criminal than anyone else.
And every single one of us were punished for speech. I didn't know that many J6 people before J6. Now after, I know dozens and dozens. I've heard all of their stories. I know we all share this common experience that we were in court with these judges. And I'm not even paraphrasing. This is literally like word for word what the judges said in nearly every case. We're not going to punish Mr. Strand or Mr. Straka for his speech. He has First Amendment rights. However, Mr. Straka said, patriots stormed the Capitol from all sides. And Mr. Straka said, blah, blah, blah. And these statements indicate that Mr. Straka doesn't take the events of January 6th seriously. And therefore, we're going to teach him a deterrent for. So it started with, you're not going to be punished for your speech, but you said this, and that's why we're going to punish you.
The gaslighting was insane.
Insane.
Black robe gaslighting. It was over and over and over again. Every one of these trials, you can go through the transcripts, you can see what was said. And they said, this isn't about political. Judge Cooper, my judge, this ain't about free speech.
But
you said this and you said this. And
but then the entire thing was based on tweets and private text messages.
Yep.
My judge admitted there is no evidence of you actually doing anything because I didn't do anything. He said it's kind of tough to prove criminal intent. He said that. Like in the book, I go through transcript lines and it's unbelievable what he admitted on the record. And yet, but I'm going to put you in prison for almost 3 years.
Wow.
Well, that's why I think the community that we kind of found with each other after the fact is so important, because we do sometimes, like if I were just sitting around talking with people who didn't know much about January 6th, I probably wouldn't be laughing. But when we're around each other, we will laugh about the most horrible things that happen to us because we all experienced it.
And we didn't get a chance to say this earlier, but Brandon and I met each other in the course of that crazy year of 2020 with the lockdowns and the re-election campaign for Trump. I was leading a freedom rally in Beverly Hills that grew to tens of thousands of people right here in LA. You probably saw this, Marissa. And so Walkaway did an event in Los Angeles. So we combined and had thousands of people. It was this amazing
yes.
event.
I know which one it was.
It was amazing. It was huge. And so we met that day in person. I'd known him from afar, really loved the work he was doing. And but we clicked. And then we went through this war period of all these things that happened. And then after the January 6th arrests and we're figuring out what's going on, there was some space, and then we kind of reconnected. And then we've really helped just support each other through the endurance of all these things. So, figuring out how to go to trial and figuring out what's going on with all of these media attacks, and the judge leaked documents that caused even more negative effects for Brandon. And then I go to prison. I'm disappeared. Like it's been insane. But I mean, I'm so glad that we have each other and that we've been able to support each other and just experience.
It's been everything.
Yeah. The battle tested friendship that we have and the relationships that we've developed with other J6ers it's forged in fire, truly. And it's a really special bond and connection and opportunity that we have to build.
Aside from the pardon, which is obviously very significant and probably everything, is the White House doing anything else, or is there I don't know.
So yeah, we hope that the White House will reach out and really honor the J6ers, have an event of some kind. Like I said, I think we need to have some memorialization. I think there should be a memorial in the Capitol building, establishing the history. Now we need more of the truth to come out. This is where we get back to the Kash Patel and Dan Bongino conversation. They need to really get their sleeves rolled up and get to work. I believe they will. We will be helping to support and push that charge in the court of public opinion and building public support for that. The We Are J6 movement is really important to help establish the need and the truth and public demand for restorative justice, which includes victim recovery, but government accountability. So.
Yeah, and there has to be some sort of like financial restoration, first of all, just from a practical standpoint, because a lot of these people that, even though they were treated like terrorists and classified as terrorists, were people in their 60s and 70s, with no prior criminal record. They'll never recover from this. People who they lost their life savings, their homes, their cars, everything that they had, and they're old, like they can't recover. So from a practical standpoint, it has to be done. But, all of us kept hearing for years, we need to be taught a deterrent. We need to be taught a deterrent. I believe the government needs to be taught a deterrent to never do this to anyone ever again. And if that means, hitting them hard with some sort of compensation package that they need to offer the people that they did this to, I think that's the deterrent that our government should be taught to make sure that they never do this to people again.
And also for the public to recognize, right? I think we have to have a national reckoning with January 6th, start to finish. We need to get completely to the bottom of everything that happened, how and why it happened. It's really critical because you can't have a country built on lies. And we've been operating in this wartime environment with this issue about attack on democracy and all of these inversions that are the opposite of what's going on, and we see Elon Musk pulling the curtain back on the government, how it's been operating. And we realize for decades, the government's been stealing all our money and then running all these scams with NGOs and shell games to basically hollow out the middle class and keep an entrenched bureaucracy rich and in control. So we have to have a national reckoning with these things. January 6th has been a big part of that attack. And I think we need to come to terms with that as a nation.
It'll be interesting to see what comes out.
Yeah, and they need to have a Republican select committee. I believe they said they were going to do that, and I have to believe that Donald Trump himself has enough skin in the game to want to see that happen, since he was basically blamed for the entire thing, right? But yeah, I mean, there's still who's the pipe bomber? Who's the J6 pipe bomber? Like, do we ever get to find that out? Like,
this Pelosi's fixer guy. I want to learn more about that. I mean, we know Pelosi declined the 10,000 National Guard troops. We know she and Mark Milley essentially conspired to set up the ground for this to occur. How are we not talking about that? How are we not demanding accountability for officials in the highest positions of power and leadership that are supposed to literally safeguard our country and clearly acted in a way to cause this kind of thing to happen? Liz Cheney, get this. Liz Cheney, this is not my opinion. This is proven Congressman Loudermilk says, I have the receipts. It's open and shut case. She violated the exact 20-year felony statute that they put me in prison for. It's 1512C2 that they put me in prison for. That 1512, the title of the statute is tampering with a witness, victim, or informant. She tampered with a witness and destroyed evidence.
Yeah.
2 different counts of 1512 that Liz Cheney violated.
That's a good point.
Yeah. She should be facing 40 years.
How so? What did she specifically do?
She tampered with a witness, Cassidy Hutchinson, and she destroyed evidence, altered and or destroyed. It's gone. It's destroyed. So
Cassidy Hutchinson is the witness that claimed that she knew that Trump had tried to attack his driver on the way to the Capitol, and that whole story about trying to crawl forward. But we now know that Liz Cheney had contacted her in advance of her deposition before the January 6th committee, and that they had private conversations, which is completely unethical and not supposed to happen. And then,
it's an explicit example of tampering with a witness, which is a violation of that 20-year felony statute.
And one thing I'd like to say, too, which is really interesting, when John was trying to decide what he was going, well, he always knew he was going to trial. He never wavered from that. I went out of my way to try to talk him out of it. And he knew he's not a stupid guy. He's incredibly smart. He knew he was going to be convicted. He knew he was going to be found guilty. And he knew what was the road in front of him. He could not take a plea deal. He couldn't lie. He, as he kept saying, bear false witness to say that he did these things that he didn't do. But what's really interesting is we're 2 people of a very similar nature who took various different paths in this journey. And I think that we both look at what the outcome was like for each other and don't regret our choices. I could have gone to trial. I could have experienced what he experienced. I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad that what happened to him didn't happen to me. And I think that vice versa, he looks at what it's done to me to confess to things that I didn't do. And I'll never be the same person I was again. I mean, it's the toll it takes on a person mentally, spiritually, and in every way to say that you did something you didn't do. You can't really recover from that. And I think that as horrible as the hell that he went through was, I think he still probably feels like you're glad you didn't take a plea deal.
Really,
right?
John? You don't regret it?
Not for a single second ever.
What if you could go back to January 4th and never be in D.C. during that time?
So, I mean, the Bible says that we should be wise, right? So if you have advanced intel to avoid a potentially dangerous situation, it's definitely worth considering if you should make a wise choice or whatnot. So I'm not saying I would just dive in because I love all the insanity of it or whatnot. But assuming that I had no way to know that, which no one did, of course, I'm very grateful for and very proud of everything I did that week, that day, and then in my choices thereafter.
Do you have more faith in the FBI and our justice system now that
No.
things have changed? Have things changed at all?
I have no faith that is not earned from the government, and the government has been incredibly what's the word? What is the government has been an unbelievable failure, disappointment, and a danger to its own citizens. I am Exhibit A, literally. So I'm not saying that I don't have optimism and hope. I certainly do. I support President Trump as strongly as anyone in this country. I went to prison for him. I would do it again. I believe strongly in his cabinet that he has chosen and the picks that he has selected, in particular Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. I think that's very, very good sign. So I'm hopeful. But no, I currently view the FBI as a terrorist organization. I have said that publicly many times, and I mean it. And so I'm hopeful that changes quickly. It needs to, but that's the honest answer of where I stand now.
What does the next chapter in your life look like?
Mine could be all kinds of things. I'm very excited about. I'm very excited about the book that I wrote in prison, which is called Patriot Plea. You can pre-order it now at johnstrand.com. And I really hope, Marissa, that you will read this book. It will blow your mind. I spare no expense on the details. And it's just an insane story of kind of where God has brought me to this point, and then what happened with January 6th and everything after. It's also a really interesting call to courage and call to patriotism for, people of my generation. Like, it's time to really step up to the plate of what it really means to be an American. And that's why I have hope about reforming the FBI and reforming the government, because I believe that there are people like Brandon and myself that have what it takes and that have a calling and have a responsibility and a duty as a citizen that we are totally capable of taking. So I'm excited about sharing that message and really to continue to advocate for the restorative justice that needs to happen for our nation overall related to January 6th. Certainly victim recovery for people that have had their lives destroyed. There are over 1,500 people that were arrested. Their lives have been devastated beyond comprehension. Brandon and I are both working on a project right now called wearej6.com that is doing a lot of work to help expose the false narrative, educate the public about what really happened, share with the public who we are, who are J6ers. We are J6. That's Brandon Struck. It's John Strand. It's Dr. Gold. It's various people, but we're Americans. We're your coworkers and neighbors and brothers and sisters. And so we need the public to understand that. So we're going to bring those stories as well as advocate for financial restitution, which is really necessary for these people.
Brandon, you started the organization Walk Away many years ago. Can you just explain what it is real quick?
Walk Away is still, I think, very much an important and necessary movement that's happening in this country. And in fact, I would argue that the 2024 election was the walkaway election. I mean, Donald Trump incorporated into his team Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., so many people who were once Democrats and now walking away. And I think, as terrible as the last 4 years were for everybody in this country, one way or another, it did offer us the opportunity to see what life was like 4 years of Trump, 4 years of Biden, and now we have an opportunity once again to right the ship. And I think that, what really pushed Donald Trump over the top were that so many Black people, Hispanic people, LGBT people, Jewish people made the decision to walk away from the monolith that they've been voting for the Democrats in these large voting blocks and say, we have to try something different. This is not the America that we want. This is not we're better than this, I think. And so, I'm going to continue to do the work that I've been doing for 7 years, traveling the country, doing colleges, doing minority focused town halls, marches, rallies, educational videos, and getting as many people to walk away. And if people believe in that mission, they can go to walkawaycampaign.com.
John and Brandon, thank you for coming in. I'm just going to continue praying for you. I've been praying for you for years, and I'm going to continue to do it. And I want to invite everybody who's listening to continue to pray for you because you have been through hell and back. And, only God. I think there's been a lot of God recently, and we should be incredibly grateful for how the Almighty puts his hand on our country.
Amen.
Agreed.